My great visual effects on the Sega Genesis episode was met with a ton of suggestions for games that could have been included. I couldn't argue with most of them because there were some truly great looking games there. Instead of just picking 10 more myself, I decided to go with some of the picks in the comments section and share even more great looking Genesis games. What we have here is a list of stuff that ranges from polygons, to impressive scrolling effects, to pre-rendered sequences, and even just killer animation and convincing software sprite scaling effects. Heck, there's even a few first-person shooters in here. I hope you guys enjoy great visual effects on the Sega Genesis Viewer Edition. While polygons had been around for years in the arcade, we didn't see it often on home consoles until the 16-bit era. That's when developers started to get real brave and try and port games that used the technology, and some of them were actually quite cool. Perhaps even cooler, the Genesis did this stuff sans any type of acceleration chips to aid it. This is the vanilla Motorola 68000 in all its glory. Steel Talons was a 1992 release that was based on the arcade game created by Atari. It has a game world made up entirely of polygons, including the enemy vehicles. While it's much choppier than the original hardware, you have to admire the attempt to get the Genesis to run this at all. You actually do get used to the way it moves, and eventually it becomes more playable than you'd expect. 1993's Out of This World has perhaps the best intro of any 16-bit game I've ever seen. I mean, the rotoscoped animation alone puts it in a league most games can't even compete with, and its AAA cinematic presentation only helps that. The main game, of course, has its own charms, but that intro is still impressive all these years later. LHX Attack Chopper was released in 1993 by Electronic Arts, and is extremely similar to Steel Talons. Fly your helicopter around a polygonal playfield and blow stuff up. It's a bit more simmy than Steel Talons and was actually a port of the original PC version. Again, it's choppier, but something you can get a surprising amount of gameplay from. Kawasaki SUPERBIKE Challenge was a Time Warner Interactive and Domark joint that featured a fully polygonal motorcycle racing engine. This game is nothing short of incredible visually when you consider how fast it's rendering these polygons. I haven't played this game in many years, so the gameplay chewed me up and spit me out, but you can still see just how impressive this was for 1988 hardware. In 1990, another Atari Polygon arcade game was ported to the Genesis called Hard Drive-In. This was sort of a stunt simulation racer that had you taking different routes on the track, either to just straight up race, or do a bunch of stunts like jumping bridges and doing loops. Again, the Genesis does this with nothing helping it, and again, it played better than you'd expect it to. 16-bit polygon games no doubt are tougher on the eyes now, but most of this stuff came out well before the Saturn and PlayStation. Many of you love the way GUNSTAR Heroes looked on the Sega Genesis, and I agree. It was a fast, beautifully animated run and gun, but the boss fights really stood out. Aside from some of them being huge, many were rendered in such a way that they looked three-dimensional. I mean, look at some of these effects. They look great even now. There's even some cool effects later in the game I don't want to spoil for you here, so make sure you play it till the end. Heck man, you even had to love the opening treasure logo. This company really did know how to make a great game. Many of you recommended The Lost World for its impressive animation and special stages, not to mention that great opening cinematic and the excellent use of color. I always appreciated this game's flexibility with its stages and the many things it had you doing. One minute you're activating sensors, the next you're destroying nest sites, and the next you're blasting through trees chasing a T-Rex. Sometimes a game will hide its most impressive effects deep within its gameplay, and this is definitely one of them. What appears first as a simple overhead maze game gives way to some truly impressive special stages. Sometimes this game makes you wonder how some of this was done without any form of help. Appaloosa Interactive did this in late 1997, nearly 10 years after the release of the Japanese Mega Drive. I'm not the biggest fan of Sonic 3D Blast, but I have no issue admitting this game has some interesting visual effects. First you get the full motion video style opening that's done on a cartridge, and of course the pre-rendered sprites and backgrounds look damn good for a Genesis title. It was the bonus stages that took the prize for visual effects, however. This stuff looks like something you would have seen on hardware that had added chips in the cart. Yet the old Genesis was full of neat tricks thanks to the 68000 and its robust VDP. You guys know that first-person shooters weren't exactly a top genre during the 16-bit generation. I mean, it took some pretty beefy PC hardware to run most of what we saw back then, but that didn't stop a few developers from trying on the Genesis. Zero Tolerance popped up in 1994 as a joint between Technopop and Accolade, and again showcases the Genesis brute forcing an engine thanks to all that horsepower provided by its beefy processor. This game is quite playable even now, and is better than it has any right to be. I mean, seeing this really makes you wonder why no one tried to port Doom to the hardware. It even has an unreleased sequel out there that you can get that gives you more first-person shooting action. Brazil's Tectoy had the testicular fortitude to release freaking Duke Nukem 3D on the Genesis. Let me say that again. Duke freaking Nukem 3D. It only has one of the episodes from the original PC title, and that has been heavily modified in format, layout, and things to do. There are all sorts of tidbits about this game I've heard over the years. Some people claim it's a reverse hack of Zero Tolerance, and there are even some that dispute whether or not Tectoy even had the legal rights to do the game at all. None of that matters because it exists and was officially released in Brazil in late 1998, right before the Dreamcast was released in Japan. I didn't want to include fan-made homebrew games in my original episode because I wanted my selections to be stuff I played as a kid, but many of you wanted to see the fan-created Wolfenstein 3D for the Genesis. I can't fault you guys too much because this is an amazing port. Again, no additional hardware, and it runs on a real Genesis. It's not censored either, so you get the blood and Nazi imagery of the original PC release. I mean, considering what is happening here, this is nothing short of a technical marvel. If you haven't played it, I highly recommend you find a version and try it out. I talk about Castlevania Bloodlines all the time. It's one of my favorites in that series of games, so I didn't want to have it in my first episode. That didn't sit well with some of you because you love it as much as I do. So here we are, back with more Castlevania Bloodlines goodness. This one has impressive effects everywhere, whether it's the massive sprites, the cool little touches like reflections, or the way it scrolls the foregrounds and backgrounds to give off some wicked depth. You just have to give it credit. There's even some stuff here that makes it look almost like the Genesis has specialized hardware to rotate sprites and backgrounds. Konami did a great job with this, and I still consider it my favorite title on the platform. Puggsy is a sleeper if there ever was such a thing in video games. I never thought twice to look at the game back in the day because it had a stupid name and was made for kids. Or so I thought. This one has great puzzle-based gameplay, but it's also a visual stunner. Lots of great scrolling effects in the backgrounds really add a ton of depth to its presentation. There's also loads of neat effects spread throughout its stages, and you're always seeing something to impress you. Mania was another title that showed off some great effects. The stuff you see here is so good it could be called 2.5D before most people even use the term. Traveler's Tales did both these titles and really showed that they had a command of the hardware that few developers ever dreamed of. I'm gonna cheat a bit here and throw in one of my own additions, and that's Stage 2 in Shadow Dancer. The Genesis was a monster when it came to parallax scrolling. Many games used it to great effect, but it was this scene right here that's my all-time favorite. You are assaulting a bridge where your enemies are holding hostages, and good lord, the parallax effects of the clouds and water look just incredible. I would use the stage practice cheat to replay this over and over, and I love the way it looks so much. Stuff like this made owning a Genesis in those early days an unforgettable experience. Finally, I'd like to bring back two of the games I covered in my first episode because a few viewers felt I should have showed off a couple of elements they found really impressive. The first title is Red Zone, which if you remember had some great looking 3D top-down action, but I didn't mention its opening cinema. That shockingly well-animated intro is all black and red and shows off some story elements from the game. I admit it was an oversight and definitely worth covering. The second game is Ranger X. This was the mech shooter with the incredible backgrounds and sprite work, but some of you really missed me showing off the wireframe intros in each mission. It was another oversight that looked great. Now that we are 2 episodes deep on this topic, you may think we have exhausted our supply of games with great effects on the Genesis. No way, because I have 10 more in the pipeline for a future video. The Genesis was a machine that went damn near 10 years with incredible software, so we will be revisiting the topic a few more times before I'm done. I'd also like to hear more of your choices for this topic, because even though I feel I know my Genesis library well, more eyes on more games will catch the stuff that I'll miss. Let me know down in the comments and I'll make sure we touch upon it in a future episode. I'm Sega Lord X. Thank you guys for watching, and I will catch you next time.